Right, kid, come, sit by me. I've got a story for you, one that's been hidden in the shadows of history. A story so powerful it shaped the fate of kings, changed the course of wars, and steered the rise and fall of great empires. These figures, the ones who pulled the strings, were rarely seen. They weren't out on the grand battlefields or seated on golden thrones, but their whispers echoed in the ears of the most powerful rulers in history. Today we're diving into the secret intelligence network of the Persian Empire, the eyes and ears of the king. Ever wondered how rulers like Darius and Xerxes managed to keep such a vast empire under their control? Well, their true power wasn't just in their armies or their treasure-filled vaults, it was in their intelligence. Their spies uncovered the secrets of enemy kings. Their messages decided the fate of entire wars. Now, close your eyes and listen carefully. I'm taking you back in time, through the grand halls of Persian palaces and down the hidden roads where messages traveled in secret. When you open your eyes again, you won't see the world the same way, because true power isn't forged with a sword, it's built with knowledge. Ah, kid, come a little closer. Squint your eyes and imagine before you lies an empire stretching as far as the eye can see. To the east, the emerald green valleys of India glow under the first rays of the sun, while to the west, the salty breeze of the Mediterranean whispers through ancient cities. This is the Persian Empire, the mighty realm ruled by Darius and Xerxes, one of the greatest and most powerful states of its time. But tell me, kid, do you really think an empire this vast survives on the sharpness of a sword or the height of its walls alone? No. History teaches us that the strongest weapon isn't a bronze shield or a steel blade. The strongest weapon is knowledge. And the one who controls knowledge can shape the world as they please. The Persians figured this out early. Unlike other kingdoms that grew by conquering small city-states, they built a massive governing machine that brought together different peoples, cultures, and languages. But with that came a huge challenge. How do you make sure a governor in India stays loyal? How do you know if the cities along the Aegean coast are secretly planning a rebellion? If an enemy king is plotting against the Persian army, how does that information reach the great king in time? That's why the Persian rulers created one of history's most advanced intelligence networks. No whisper was too small, no rumor too insignificant. Everything, no matter how far, made its way back to Persepolis. Merchants traveling along caravan routes doubled as spies. Priests in temples carried not just prayers, but secrets. And in every province, agents known as the eyes and ears of the king reported directly to the great king himself. Because a true ruler doesn't just sit on a throne and give orders. He knows everything. He questions the loyalty of his allies, anticipates the moves of his enemies, and sees the storm before it arrives. The greatest empires aren't ruled by swords alone, but by strategy, intelligence, and information. Now, close your eyes and picture this, kid. Men moving through the shadows, blending in like ordinary travelers, their faces unreadable. A spy in the dim corner of an inn, flipping a gold coin between his fingers as he listens to whispered secrets. A servant inside a governor's palace, quietly dusting furniture while overhearing the most critical state affairs. This was the true power of the Persians. They won their wars before they ever stepped onto the battlefield. But how did this massive intelligence network actually work? Who gathered the information, and how did it travel? What tricks did these spies use to remain unseen? Now, I'm going to pull you even deeper into this world of shadows. Are you ready? Ah, kid. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You're standing in the grand palace of the great king. The towering columns of Persepolis cast long shadows, and the golden-adorned walls echo every sound in the vast stone hall. Right there in front of you sits the great King Darius on his mighty throne. Every governor, every general, every envoy who steps before him bows their head in submission. But the most interesting thing? It's not them. It's the unseen eyes watching from the shadows. These eyes, they belong to the king. And the ears hidden behind the walls, listening to every whispered word, they are his ears. You see, kid, in this empire no one was ever truly safe. Not the king's closest vizier, nor the governor plotting a rebellion in some distant desert town. The Persians turned espionage into a state policy. Swords rust, fortresses crumble, but knowledge is always the sharpest weapon, and Darius knew this better than anyone. To rule an empire of this size, brute strength and high walls weren't enough. He needed a system, an invisible force that could move undetected, sense threats before they arose, and report them back to him. And that's how the eyes and ears of the great king came to be. Let me tell you how it worked, kid. Across the Persian Empire, from the farthest provinces to the heart of Persepolis, there was an intricate web of communication. But this wasn't just about messengers and royal couriers. No, the real power lay in unseen hands. Agents disguised as merchants traveled from city to city, blending into the crowds. They were in the inns, the marketplaces, the ports, the temple courtyards. They were everywhere. When a cart got stuck in the mud, when a potter opened his shop at dawn, when a soldier sat down to sharpen his blade. Those agents were there, watching, listening. They saw everything, heard everything, and secretly passed it all back to the king's most trusted men. Persian governors didn't just answer to their king, they also had to answer to these hidden spies. Was a governor collecting more taxes than allowed? Was a general secretly building his own army? Was a city filled with whispers of rebellion? Every piece of information first reached regional agents, then got passed up the chain to high-ranking intelligence officers, loyal to the king. Sometimes it was a priest gathering secrets in a temple. Sometimes it was an innkeeper overhearing late-night conversations. Everybody knew something, but no one ever knew who was working for whom. That was the Persians' greatest strength. Information moved faster than the blade. Now think about it, kid. In an empire this vast, how do you tell who's truly loyal and who's just waiting for the right moment to betray you? Who do you trust? Who do you keep an eye on? That's where the real danger of the king's spies came into play. They didn't just gather information, they spread it too. False rumors were planted to sow chaos among enemies. Before Persian armies even marched, spies infiltrated enemy lands, spreading misinformation to confuse and weaken them. The Persians won many battles without ever drawing their swords. But tell me, kid, doesn't a spy network this big have its own weaknesses? Can a system like this truly be perfect? Couldn't the enemy infiltrate it too? And one day, would the same shadow army the Persians built come back to haunt them? That, my friend, is a story for another time. Ah, kid. Now take a deep breath and close your eyes. Imagine, hidden in the shadows of the great Persian Empire, slipping through stone-paved alleys, vanishing into bustling markets, listening to whispers echoing through the grand palace walls. Do you know who they were? They were the ones who fought without swords, the soldiers of an invisible army. They were the first spies of the Persian Empire. But these men weren't just anyone. Can a spy ever be ordinary? They were handpicked from all across the empire. Some were noticed for their talents as children. Others were drawn into this shadowy game later in life. Many were chosen from soldiers, merchants, bureaucrats, and sometimes even priests. A soldier's agility, a merchant's persuasion, a bureaucrat's discretion, and a priest's patience. These were the qualities of a true Persian spy. But the hardest part? The training, kid. Not just anyone could become a spy. Before anything else, their loyalty was tested, because information could only be entrusted to the most reliable hands. They were cut off from their families, their pasts erased, taught to see themselves as mere shadows of the empire. The first lesson? Silence. Because only those who master silence truly understand the power of words. They learned how to walk without leaving a trace, how to blend into crowds without drawing attention, how to look someone in the eyes and tell the most convincing lies. Then came the art of communication, A spy's greatest enemy was their own tongue. They never spoke openly, never wrote things down directly, never aroused suspicion. They had countless ways of passing on information. Sometimes a single hidden sentence on what seemed like an ordinary trade contract held a crucial secret. Sometimes a tiny code, woven into the patterns of a carpet, carried a hidden message. Other times a small clay tablet was tucked away inside a sack of spices. But the most dangerous, the most skilled among them, they carried secrets in their minds, never writing anything down, never leaving a trace. They were the most valuable of all, because even if they were caught, no letter, no document, no single piece of evidence could betray them. These men were shadows in the night. One day they might be seen as a servant attending a foreign envoy. The next they'd be leading a caravan of mules. No one noticed them, because their greatest power was their ability to be utterly unremarkable. A few casual words spoken by an old fruit vendor in the morning market might be the first sign of a brewing rebellion. A whispered prayer in a temple could reveal the exact border where an enemy army was planning to attack. But kid, no matter how skilled, no matter how careful they were they ever truly safe? What if the enemy was using the same tricks? What if the Persian Empire itself was crawling with spies working for other powers? Now that's a whole different story. Ah, kid, now close your eyes and picture it. An endless road stretching into the horizon. Wide, straight, paved with smooth stones, the Persian Empire was vast, reaching from east to west, crossing deserts, mountains, and rivers. But more importantly, this empire thrived because of a network of roads, connecting it like the veins of a living body. And at the heart of it all was the greatest, the grandest, the most crucial of them all, the Royal Road of Persia. King Darius wasn't just a ruler who won battles. He was a mastermind who secured his empire with intelligence. He knew that ruling a kingdom wasn't just about having powerful armies. It was about having a fast and reliable communication system. That's why the Royal Road existed, stretching over 1,500 miles, 2,500 km, from Sardis to Persepolis. This incredible route was the empire's lifeline. But kid, this road wasn't just for merchants, soldiers, or messengers. There was something unseen moving along it. Spies, whispers, and secrets flowed through this road just as much as trade and armies did. The Persians revolutionized the art of communication. Along the Royal Road, they built way stations, postal relays, and watchtowers. At every station, riders were on standby, ready to pass messages down the line, like links in a chain, all the way to Persepolis. But here's the real secret. This network wasn't just for official decrees. It was also the backbone of the empire's intelligence system. Now imagine, kid, it's early morning. A lone rider gallops down the dusty road. He looks like an ordinary merchant, but there's tension in his face. Slung over his shoulder is a simple cloth bag, seemingly nothing more than a bundle of fabric, but hidden inside is a coded message, written with masterful secrecy. This man isn't just any traveler. He's an agent, an intelligence officer. As the first rays of sunlight hit a nearby way station, he slows his horse, exchanges a few casual words with the station keeper, and hands over the bag. To anyone watching, he's just a trader handling goods. But that bag isn't just for a caravan. It's feeding the Persian Empire's vast network of spies. And here's the most mind-blowing part, kid. This system was so well organized that a message could travel from one end of the empire to the other in just a few days. At the time, that kind of speed was almost unimaginable. But the Persians had mastered it. Every stop along the Royal Road was a link in the chain. Spies used these way stations to pass along information, and couriers wasted no time carrying messages to the next post. But remember this, kid. Did this vast intelligence network serve only the Persians? What if an enemy spy used the speed and efficiency of the Royal Road to smuggle secrets to the empire's enemies? What if the very road that was Persia's greatest pride became its greatest weakness. And that, kid, is a story for another time. Ah, kid, empires don't survive on swords, armies, and wars alone. Real power lies in who controls information. The Persians knew better than anyone that ruling a vast empire wasn't just about military might. Information was sharper than any dagger, stronger than the walls of a fortress. But information had to be moved, and that made it dangerous. Because when information changes hands, so does the fate of kingdoms. That's why the Persians developed ways to protect it and deliver it securely. They mastered the art of secret communication, encryption, and disguising their spy. Now close your eyes and picture this. A Persian spy carrying an urgent message has to cross enemy territory without getting caught and make it to Sepopolis. But if he simply writes the message down on parchment, what happens? The moment it falls into enemy hands, the empire's deepest secrets are exposed. That's why the Persians came up with incredible ways to hide and encode messages. One of the most brilliant and oldest techniques was tattoo encryption. A spy's head would be shaved and a secret message would be tattooed onto his scalp. Then he'd wait for his hair to grow back, completely hiding the message. Months later, that spy, disguised as a merchant, a traveler, or even a beggar, would set off on his journey. Once he reached his destination, a trusted ally would shave his head again, revealing the hidden message beneath his skin. That's how secrets could be carried in plain sight, hidden even from the sharpest enemy eyes. But the Persians didn't stop there. Sometimes messages were hidden inside the most ordinary objects. A tiny piece of parchment sewn into a belt, a small clay tablet disguised among a merchant's goods, or words subtly woven into the fabric of a rug. Objects that seemed harmless could actually carry the empire's most crucial. Even more ingenious was the use of invisible ink. Messages written with lemon juice, vinegar, or special plant extracts would dry and vanish completely. But when exposed to heat or a particular liquid, the words would magically reappear. As long as the enemy never suspected, these messages could be transported safely across vast distances. And of course, encryption played a key role too. Some messages were written in codes that could only be deciphered by those who had the right key. Words were shifted, letters were replaced, or messages were hidden within poems or sacred texts. Even if an enemy intercepted the message, decoding it was nearly impossible. But kid, hiding a message wasn't enough. A spy also had to hide himself. Persian spies mastered the art of disguise. Some posed as merchants, others as priests. Some acted as simple travelers, while others went as far as infiltrating enemy palaces by working as servants. The people enemies trusted the most were sometimes the most dangerous spies. Now think about this. Were the Persians the only ones who learned these secret arts? What if these techniques fell into the hands of their enemies? If a spy was so well hidden that even he forgot who he really was, could he ever be caught? That, my friend, is the story I'm about to tell you next. Listen, kid. Running an empire isn't just about sitting on a throne and giving orders. Real power comes from knowing what others can't see. If you don't know what your enemies are planning, it doesn't matter how sharp your sword is. You're just swinging in the dark. That's why the Persian Empire's greatest weapon wasn't its armies. It was the spies lurking in the shadows. They were the great king's eyes and ears. These spies weren't just sneaking around enemy lands. They were active inside the empire too. But what were they after? What kind of information were they gathering? Let me tell you, kid. You need to understand how they carried secrets that could decide the fate of a king. One of the most valuable pieces of intel was military strategy. The Persians had to know how their enemies trained their soldiers, how many men they had, what weapons they used, and even how they lined up on the battlefield. Because wars are won before the first sword is drawn, a spy might eavesdrop on enemy generals, sneak into military camps to count supplies, or even serve as a lowly servant in a general's household, watching, listening, waiting for the perfect piece of information to send back home. But keeping an eye on foreign enemies wasn't enough. Internal threats were just as dangerous. An empire doesn't survive on swords alone. It stands on the loyalty of its people. Persian spies were everywhere, listening to the whispers of the streets, sensing unrest, and tracking the first signs of rebellion. Imagine this, kid. A merchant sitting in the corner of a roadside inn, sipping his drink, listening to the locals. To everyone else, he's just another trader. But in reality, he's feeding information straight to the great king. Were people complaining about high taxes? Was a governor getting too ambitious? Was someone in a small village claiming to be the rightful heir to the throne? These weren't just rumors. They were threats that could shake an empire to its core. And if rebellion was brewing, the king had to know before it spread. And then there was the world of politics beyond Persia's borders. Persian spies worked their way into enemy courts, gathering intelligence on foreign rulers. Who was loyal to whom? Which princes were eyeing the throne? Were enemy kings fighting among themselves? Sometimes one tiny piece of information could change the course of a war. Imagine a spy learning that a rival king didn't trust his own generals. Suddenly, the great king had leverage. Maybe that general could be persuaded to switch sides. Another crucial target? Trade routes and the economy. Wealth was the lifeblood of any empire, and the Persians needed to know where it flowed. Were enemy cities starving? Did a kingdom have enough resources to support a massive army? Which trade routes were booming and which ones were vulnerable? Because sometimes the best way to win a war wasn't with swords, but by cutting off an enemy's food supply. And perhaps the most delicate mission of all, watching the great king's own palace. The bigger an empire, the more open it was to betrayal. Spies weren't just looking outward, they had to watch their own. Who was visiting the palace? Which nobleman was secretly meeting with a general? Which prince was whispering with a high priest? Because sometimes, a king's worst enemy wasn't across the battlefield, it was sitting right beside him. That's the way it was, kid. Persian spies weren't just shadowy figures sneaking through alleys. They were the unseen force shaping the fate of an empire. But no matter how skilled a spy was, one mistake could bring the whole network crashing down. And what happened if a Persian spy was exposed? If they fell into enemy hands? Well, that's a story for another time. Ah, kid. No matter how sharp a ruler's sword is, or how massive his armies are, if he doesn't know when and how to strike, he's already digging his own grave. History is littered with the corpses of rulers who misused their power. But Persian kings, especially great Darius and his son Xerxes, knew how to use knowledge as a weapon. Their greatest treasure wasn't gold, it was intelligence gathered in the shadows. Anasiya de Bithi, knowing their enemies' moves, sensing unrest in their own lands, and uncovering the true intentions of their allies, shaped their destiny. So listen closely, because I'm about to tell you how the Persian emperors read their spy reports and turned information into victory. Darius. Ah, great Darius. He didn't take the Persian throne with just his sword, he took it with his mind. Like the kings before him, he inherited an empire in chaos. But he knew something they didn't. An empire isn't ruled by force alone. It's ruled by information. Darius's spy network was his eyes and ears. He planted spies everywhere, not just to watch his enemies, but to keep tabs on his own people. Was a rebellion brewing somewhere? Were taxes becoming a major complaint? Was a satrap secretly gaining too much power? Darius knew these things long before they became real problems. But the real challenge? Foreign threats. Ruling an empire that stretched from India to Anatolia, from Egypt to Central Asia, required constant vigilance. The smallest sign of weakness could invite disaster. That's why Darius always had intelligence on what was happening inside enemy courts. Were the Greek city-states forming alliances? Was an Egyptian governor dreaming of independence? Darius got the answers before war even started, so he could win battles before war even started. So he could win battles before they began. Take the Ionian Revolt, for example. The Greek city-states in Ionia rose up against Persian rule. If Darius had ignored his intelligence, the rebellion could have spread like wildfire. But what did he do? His spies told him that the Greek cities were divided, that some didn't even support the rebellion. That was all the advantage he needed. Divide the enemy, find their weak spots, crush their resistance. And just like that, the rebellion was crushed with ruthless precision. And then there was Xerxes. He inherited his father's empire and his spy network. Xerxes knew the power of information firsthand. You probably remember his great Greek campaign, the Battle of Thermopylae, the naval clash at Salamis. But behind those legendary battles was the intelligence gathered by Persian spies. Take Thermopylae, for example. When the Persians reached the narrow pass, the Spartans were blocking their way. But then Xerxes received a report from his spies. There was another path, a secret mountain trail called the Anopaya Pass. If not for this intelligence, the Persians might never have broken through. But thanks to their spies, they outflanked Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, sealing their fate. But here's the thing, kid, intelligence isn't always reliable. One bad report can lead to disaster. Before the Battle of Salamis, Xerxes' spies told him the Greek fleet was scattered and ready to flee. But it was a trap. The Greeks lured the Persians into a narrow strait where their massive fleet became a liability. Xerxes trusted bad intelligence and walked straight into a devastating defeat. That's the power of intelligence, kid. The right information can shape the fate of an empire, but the wrong information can bring down even the mightiest armies. And that raises a question. If spies were this important, how did the Persians train them? How were they chosen? Well, that, my friend, is a secret I'll reveal next. Kid, war isn't just about clashing swords. The real battle happens in the shadows, where no one sees it. Sometimes what a sword can't accomplish, a whisper, a letter, or a few words murmured by a traitor in the dead of night can. The conflict between the Persians and the Greeks wasn't just fought on the battlefield with massive armies. It was also shaped by the mind games played by spies lurking in the dark. King Darius the Great and later his son Xerxes knew that before steel, knowledge had to be their greatest weapon against the Greek world. The Persians had always relied on vast intelligence networks to govern their empire. But dealing with the Greeks was a whole different challenge. The Greeks weren't like the Persians, who followed a single ruler. They were independent, unpredictable, and incredibly cunning. If the Persians wanted to bring the Greek world to its knees, they couldn't just rely on their armies. They had to infiltrate their cities with spies. Persian spies spread across the trade routes, slipping into Greek ports. Some posed as merchants, others as mercenaries, and some even as scholars. They roamed the bustling markets of Athens, gathering whispers and rumors, while trying to uncover the secrets of Sparta's disciplined army. Some bribed Athenian politicians, others gathered intelligence through enslaved people in Sparta. Especially in Athens, there were plenty of people willing to be bought with gold. The Persians embedded themselves deep within Greek society, doing everything they could to stir up internal conflict. After all, the best way to conquer a city wasn't always by force. Sometimes you just had to let it rot from the inside. But the Greeks weren't blind to what was happening. Once they realized that Persian spies were lurking in the shadows, they started playing their own game. Athens and Sparta both had their own intelligence operations. Sparta's Crypteia, a secret organization, wasn't just used to spy on enemies. It also maintained order within Spartan society itself. The Athenians, on the other hand, became masters of overseas espionage. Greek spies infiltrated Persian courts, posing as diplomats, traders, or even trusted advisors. Some even managed to climb the ranks of Persian administration, gaining access to critical military and political secrets. But there's one thing every spy knows, kid. Knowledge is the greatest weapon, but also the greatest trap. Misinformation could lead an empire to ruin. That's why, in this hidden war between the Persians and the Greeks, it wasn't just about gathering intelligence. It was also about spreading false information. Persians deliberately leaked fake news to turn the Greek city-states against each other. Athens didn't trust Sparta? Then why not send Athens leaders a forged letter suggesting that Sparta had secretly allied with the Persians? Once the city-states started suspecting each other, they were too busy fighting among themselves to unite against the Persian army. But the Greeks played the same game. When the Persians thought the Greeks were weak and divided, it was often just a carefully laid trap. The Greeks fed false intelligence to the Persians, tricking them into making bad decisions. So when the Persians attacked, thinking they'd crush an easy target, they often found themselves facing unexpected. This war of shadows claimed the lives of countless spies. Some were caught and tortured, while others vanished, taking their secrets with them. But here's the real question, kid. Who actually won this battle? The Persians? The Greeks? Or was it the spies who lived in the shadows? To find the answer, let me take you to the next great secret. Ah, kid. The power and glory of the Persian Empire weren't just about showing strength to the outside world. They came from keeping order within. A shining sword was important, sure, but so was the power of words. Think about it. A massive empire, stretching thousands of miles from the endless jungles of India in the east to the salty Mediterranean winds in the west. And within these vast lands lived countless different people, cultures, and beliefs. But with that diversity came a threat. Every nation under Persian rule dreamed of independence, and every leader wanted more power for themselves. That's why the great king's biggest fear wasn't some foreign invasion. It was rebellion from within. The empire was divided into provinces called satrapies, each ruled by a satrap, like a governor. These satraps had authority over their regions, almost like kings in their own right. But acting like a king often led to thinking like one, and ambition could turn dangerous. That's where the spies came in. They were the invisible eyes and ears of the empire, scattered across the land. Some posed as merchants and walked right into royal courts. Others dressed as priests and listened to whispered confessions in temples. Some even worked as servants, blending into the background while secretly watching and listening. Their mission? To keep an eye on the satraps. Was one of them gathering troops at an unusual time? Were they secretly raising taxes for their own benefit? Holding secret meetings with other satraps? If so, those whispers would find their way to Persepolis before anyone else even suspected a thing. Kings like Darius and Xerxes didn't waste time when they got intel like this. They knew that stopping a rebellion before it even started was the key to keeping the empire stable. Sometimes a satrap would simply be removed and replaced with someone more loyal. Other times, things got darker. A banquet might be arranged, and over dinner, one of the satrap's most trusted men would be poisoned. On the great king's orders, of course. Or, in the dead of night, a squad of soldiers would storm the satrap's palace, chain him up, and drag him to Persepolis to answer for his crimes. But not every rebellion could be stopped so easily. When the seeds of resistance had already taken root in the hearts of the people, spies alone weren't enough. That's when the full force of the Persian army had to step in. And let's not forget, the spies weren't just watching the provinces, they were also keeping tabs on the power struggles within the royal court itself. Even inside the palace walls, there were always princes, viziers, and generals, scheming for their own gain, looking for ways to tip the balance of power in their favor. The spies kept track of it all. Was a prince secretly meeting with military leaders? Was a vizier questioning the king's decisions a little too openly? These were the kinds of whispers that could change the fate of an empire. But let me ask you this, kid. What happens when the spies themselves become disloyal? What if they too are tempted by ambition, twisting the truth for their own gain? Could the empire's greatest weapon become its greatest weakness? That is a story for another time. Kid, some battles aren't won with clashing swords on the battlefield. Sometimes victory is decided in the shadow of a dagger, at the bottom of a cup, or behind a door that silently closes in the dead of night. One of the most lethal yet unseen weapons of the Persian Empire was just that. Spies, assassins, and remember, an empire isn't built only through conquest, but also by quietly weakening its enemies from within. The Persians didn't just fight their enemies in open battle. Some foes weren't meant to be defeated on the battlefield, but eliminated before war even began. That's why the intelligence network known as the eyes and ears of the king didn't just gather information, they made decisions that changed the course of history. When necessary, they struck with deadly precision. Persian assassins went through years of training. Some were raised as slaves, allowing them to infiltrate their targets' inner circles. Others disguised themselves as merchants, gaining trust and influence. And then there were those planted within enemy palaces, waiting patiently for years, watching, listening, until the perfect moment arrived. A single drop of poison in a goblet of wine, a swift blade pressed against a throat in the still of the night. Great King Darius and his successors knew exactly how to use these warriors as shadows. Take the Egyptian rebellion, for example. I remember it well. Back then, the Egyptians were preparing to rise against Persian rule, rallying behind a powerful leader who carried himself like a pharaoh. A full-scale war would have been costly and dragged on for years. So, instead of sending an army, the Persians sent a single man. One of the rebel leader's closest servants was in fact a long-time Persian agent. And one night, just a few drops of poison found their way into his cup. By morning, the leader never woke up, and without him, the rebellion crumbled before it could even begin. But sometimes, taking down a single man wasn't enough. Sometimes, an entire army needed to be weakened, or even an entire city brought to its knees. That's when sabotage came into play. Persian spies would sneak into enemy fortresses to poison water supplies, set fire to food stores, or blow up ammunition depots. Why lay siege to a city when you could simply starve them out? If the people inside ran out of bread, they would open the gates themselves. But kid, don't think for a second that Persia's enemies sat idly by. They learned quickly. The Greeks in particular became well aware of these shadow wars and developed their own counterintelligence strategies. Some assassinations were foiled at the last moment. Some Persian spies were caught and executed in the town square. But Persian agents were always adapting, new disguises, new tactics, new plots. And now I have to ask you the big question. What happens when this dark art turns against the Persians themselves? What if the very assassins they trained one day turn their blades in the wrong direction? What then? Well, that, my friend, is a story for another time. Kid, never forget, no empire lasts forever. Just like the strongest walls eventually crack, even the most powerful intelligence networks weaken, unravel, and fade away. The Persians built one of the greatest empires of their time, protecting it from the shadows with spies and informants. But when corruption creeps into even the grandest palaces, when the most loyal servants turn traitor, and when the sharpest daggers fall into the wrong hands, well, by then the enemy isn't knocking at the door, they're already inside. And that's exactly what happened in the final days of the Persian Empire. The once mighty intelligence network known as the King's Eyes and Ears had started going blind and deaf. How? It all began with small cracks. The kings were no longer as sharp as their ancestors. Some were too caught up in power struggles, others too distracted by court intrigues. The satraps, the governors of Persia's vast provinces, grew more independent, their loyalty to the throne fading. Once vigilant spies could now be bribed, putting their own interests ahead of the king's commands. And worst of all, the enemy was learning Persia's secrets. But the final blow came with a storm. Alexander of Macedon. When that young commander set his sights on Persia, he didn't just rely on his army. He used his mind and his own spies just as effectively. He didn't just fight the Persian Empire, he infiltrated it. He exploited greed and disloyalty, turning Persia's own intelligence system against itself. The very same way the Persians had once slipped into enemy cities, now the enemy was slipping into Persia's heart. Greek spies reached deep into the Persian court, even persuading key officials to switch sides. Before Persian armies could even march, Their movements had already been whispered into Alexander's ear. Then came the Battle of Gaugamela. Ah, that was the moment Persia's intelligence truly collapsed. The Persians had no clue where Alexander was heading, misled by false reports. Their spies failed to uncover his real battle plans, and conflicting information left the royal court paralyzed. King Darius III misjudged his enemy, positioning his troops in all the wrong places. On the battlefield, Alexander made all the right moves while Darius's advisors stood frozen in fear, unsure of what to do. That day, Persia didn't just lose a battle, it lost the very art of espionage that had once kept its empire alive. In the end, Persian spies were either captured or forced to serve new masters. Loyalty was bought with gold, crushed with fear, and as the empire crumbled, so did the once feared intelligence network, fading into history without a sound. But kid, remember this, history repeats itself. When one empire falls, another rises. The Persians lost, but could Alexander's empire last forever? That, my friend, is the real question.